All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Design Build Hunt podcast, which is presented by Whitetail Partners. Tonight, I've got Mr. Jake Hendrickson back on the line. Jake, what's going on, buddy?
Not a whole lot. How are you, Josh?
Doing pretty good. It's been a total of 5 minutes since we stopped recording our last podcast episode.
Yep.
So not a lot's changed since last week when people are listening to this. We record them in a little bit of a batch there. But Jake, I thought one of the things that would be really beneficial to talk about, not only for us as we kind of think through what our year is going to look like and prioritizing work on our own properties, but for those listening as well, I think that planning your winter schedule, planning your habitat improvements for the year, looking ahead right now as to what you're going to do and accomplish on your property is often overlooked. I hear guys who are like, "Oh yeah, I've got, sometime this winter I'm going to get out there and, improve the bedding area, or I'm going to release some oak trees, or I'm going to, get rid of this invasive species that's been giving me problems, or do this to my food plots." Next thing you know, Christmas is busy. The beginning of a new year is busy. Well, then turkey season's right around the corner. Well, then bass fishing's getting real hot. Next thing you know, it's July and they're like, "Oh, maybe I should go start thinking about whitetails again and put some cameras up." And the best, in my opinion, of the habitat season, as we might call it, is already behind you at that point, right? Like you've already missed a really good window. And that's not to say you can't do things at that time of year, because you really, really can. But boy, it's a lot nicer cutting down trees in February than it is to try to do that in July or August or other terrible times of the year when it's super hot. So let's talk through that whole topic. And I want to begin with, when you're thinking about habitat improvement on your property or on the properties of some clients that you're helping, how are you helping them think through the planning phase and the structure phase? Like, what are some of the starting points, I guess you would say, for mapping out the year ahead when it comes to habitat?
So I would say that you hit a lot of good points right there. The first thing we got to figure out is what's the most important piece for the property, because there's a lot of things that we can do, but we don't want to necessarily jump into a lot of detail work right away when there's a lot of I guess big stuff we got to tackle first. Like for example, let's say we still have to worry about access. That would be something that I would put on the top of the priority list. And or logging, for example. Like if a lot of guys have a lot of trees that need to come down, before we start making individual deer beds and cutting trails through our bedding area, we kind of got to cut the trees down first. And then you got to kind of see, how big are these trees? Are these trees that we need to have a logger come in and take them out? Or are these smaller trees that we can go do it ourselves? So that's where you got to kind of talk through it. And that's where every property is different. With one, what are their top priorities for what's needed? Or two, then once you have a detailed list of top priorities, then how do you tackle each one? There's kind of an order of operations with each habitat improvement. So with
Right.
creating bedding areas, there's an order of operations. With putting in food plots, there's an order of operations. And so once you kind of nail down what are my top priorities for this property, and I think that it's also important, just like with hunting, set realistic goals. You're not going to do everything in here. So tackle the most important ones first, and then once you figure that out, then you got to figure out, when can I do this? So you're not going to put in a food plot. You're not going to plant a food plot in February, right? So that's when you cut the trees down. So that's where you got to start. Okay, this is where we're doing a lot of our timber work on our property in the dormant season. And then as we start transitioning into, like up here, it's more March, April. Now we can start thinking about if we're doing any frost seeding, like if we already have established plots, right? Then okay, we can maybe do a little frost seeding, or so we can start doing some prep work for spraying. Like if we're gonna if in April we might, if we get a really warm spring, we might start spraying, or maybe you need to do a burn. For us, it's a lot of switchgrass that gets burned. That would be early April, late March, if you're going to do something like that. And then as you start transitioning into the summer, then you can start doing your summer food plots or your screening. And then you start cutting less. So there's different stages for everything, but yeah, I would say the most important thing is establish a list of priorities that your property needs, and then after that, then you tackle each one with the correct order that needs to happen for that specific improvement.
Right. So let's zoom out big picture there. Um, as we're thinking about what needs to be done on a property, like let's say a guy is starting from scratch or just kind of saying, you know what, I think I've been going about this incorrectly because, you know, it's really tempting this time of year. You get in the woods, you find the hot deer sign, and you start thinking, all right, that's the tree I'm going to sit in, and then we're off to the races, right? Like we've already picked our tree. Um, but there's a lot of other things that need to get figured out, like access. You know, that is one of the least flashy things. You tell a guy, hey, I really need you to get a skid steer with a mulcher in here, and we need a perimeter trail around the outside so that we can access from different angles. And they're like, oh, I don't want to spend that money on my access. It's like, well, if you don't spend the money on your access, the rest of your habitat improvements might as well not happen because yeah, you might hold some deer on your property, but you're not going to hunt them effectively. You're not going to hunt them efficiently. That's for sure. You're going to blow them out every time you come through here. So as you zoom out from a property, how do you start to determine, okay, these are the things that I have to get done? Like, how do you pick the big picture things before we start putting them in order?
So you hit the one of the most important ones right away, if not the most important, and that's access. So some properties, and I've been noticing this on some guys in Michigan, not quite half, but just under half, guys are starting to put in their perimeter trails. So I
Yeah,
think
they are.
that there's enough content out there now. There's enough media, whether it's articles, podcasts, YouTube videos. I don't know, where they're getting it, but there's enough information now out there where a lot of guys are getting these perimeter trails established. So when
Yep.
I go there for the first time, some of them either have the entire property done with their perimeter trail, or they're halfway done. Now that's probably only 30 to 40% of properties, but it's higher than zero, where it
Right.
probably was where it was 10 years ago.
Yeah. I've
So
noticed it a lot this year as well. Like, I've had clients call this year, they got a brand new property, and they're saying, hey, Josh, I just bought the property. I just had a perimeter trail cut in. Now I want to call you. It's like,
yep,
okay, this is perfect because now not only can we start thinking about creative access and we don't have to have some of that access conversation, but now we can really get around the property when we're trying to do the actual consultation. Like we can cover it very, very efficiently in a day, which allows us to spend that day doing other things rather than trying to walk from one spot, on to the next. So yeah,
right.
very, very good point. So what's our next step then? So we've zoomed out. We've said access. We got to get that under control, specifically perimeter access, if we can, if the terrain will allow. What's the next step?
Then I would say it's specific on the property. Like every property is going to have different needs, and a lot of that has to do with the neighborhood. And that's kind of how I look at it. So and you can kind of break this down into three different buckets. The first one would be a heavy cover scenario. So this would be an area where there's not a lot of agriculture around, meaning there's not a lot of food. So there's going to be mast, right, and browse, depending on if there's recent clear cuts. But a lot of times it's just open timber, or maybe it's a swamp. There's just not a lot of open ground around. There's not a lot of fall food outside of
Mhm.
maybe acorn crop every once in a while. So on that property, I would say, cover and food are always important. But on that property, I would say initially I want to carve out some food plots because I want to be able to draw deer to that property. I want to establish that bed to feed pattern, and there's probably going to be some bedding on the property already if we have all that cover, but there's not going to be that consistent fall food. So that's where I want to maybe tackle food first on a property in this kind of scenario with, just heavy cover around, and to make food a priority. On the flip side, if you're in an area that's nothing but agriculture, so, or maybe just fields everywhere, could be hay fields, could be cattle pasture, just open ground, not a lot of cover on that property. Access is important, cover still important, or food still important, but on that property I want to focus heavily on cover
Mhm.
because there's not a lot in the area, and so you can really hold a lot of deer if you are holding the cover in an area with nothing but open ground. And so that's where my focus would be, and that can be a form in a lot of different ways. If you have a 40-acre woodlot in the middle of all that cover, then it's timber work. If you have a 40-acre open field in a vast ocean of open fields, then you have to start getting creative with how you design that. It's going to be a lot of grass plantings, a lot of shrubs, a lot of conifers. Basically, you're going to break that thing up with a ton of screening, so it's cover, food. Uh, you know, you're gonna be doing a lot of planting instead of doing a lot of cutting. So it depends on the property. But in that scenario where it's a lot of open ground, the top priority I would say would be cover. And so
Yeah.
you'd be adding a lot of that.
Yeah. In your neck of the woods, what are you running into as like the most common, I guess, thing that's lacking? The most common lowest hole in the bucket, I guess you would
Yeah.
call it.
So for
What is that?
me, it kind of depends on what area of the state I'm in. So if I go to northern Michigan, then it's more cover, and those guys need a lot of food. If I go to southern Michigan, most of the time those properties are more in ag country. There's a lot of open fields. Those guys need more cover. So it really depends on the area of the state I'm in. So I'm right in the dead center. So if I go north, food is a huge priority. If I go south, cover is a huge priority.
Right, right. And one thing I do want to specify. So I'm in the South. Folks who know at least my part of Georgia, this is the timber belt, right? Like this is we grow pine trees. That's what we do here. That is our cash crop, and it has been for a long time. Um, all cover is not created equally, though. So just because your, let's say, 40 acres is primarily woods, or maybe all woods, maybe it's timber from one side to the other, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have good cover, right? So, how are
Right.
you evaluating in a scenario like that where it's like, okay, it looks like it could all be covered because it's all woods, but it's not necessarily great cover. So, what are you looking for to call adequate or good cover?
So I would say that like in every scenario, it's very important to have food and cover. Like
Mhm.
no matter good cover, good
Right,
cover. But yeah, again, in the areas where there's a lot of cover, I place like my one of my primary focuses initially on food. That does not mean that there's not a focus on cover. Within every plan, you want to have the best cover in the neighborhood,
right,
right? So like a lot of those heavy cover areas, like I said, there might be some swamp in there, but a lot of it's just open timber. It's just open timber for 1,000 acres, and that, like you said, isn't good cover. Now there might be some topography where deer are bedded on the side of the hill that provides them some security, so that's a bedding area for them, but it's not like thick high stem count cover. And so that's where
right,
you have a huge opportunity as a landowner to get in there, knock some trees down, get some sunlight to the forest floor, get some regeneration to get high quality cover on your property. So the property that I live on here, that's where we're at. We're in a very heavy cover area. There's the I think the closest soybean or cornfield is 2.5 miles away. So that's pretty far. So we try to put in a lot. My primary focus here, like, or I need to provide a lot of food. I need to
mhm,
provide a lot of food, but that doesn't mean that I'm not working on cover. Like I'm already cutting trees this year. I'm going back there. I want to make the best bedding areas on my property possible because I want those deer to be bedded here. And especially in Michigan, like I'm not sure the hunting culture in Georgia, but in Michigan, cover I think cover might be like the most important thing on your property because that's what that buck wants. He wants a safe place to be, especially once the hunting pressure starts. Now you have to have food. That's why like there's a huge emphasis on food here in my heavy cover area, but I still want to have the best cover in the neighborhood. So
yeah,
I kind of maybe I said like covers like it's really hard because like you want the best cover, right? I really want the best cover, but I want to have a lot of food too, so that's a huge focus too. Those are those are top.
right, right. So if we look at a property then and we say, hey, food's top priority, right? We've got good cover, or maybe we're doing the work to get good cover. What are some of the things that you're planning? This time of year, we know, for cover, we're planning to open up the canopy. Now's the time to cut trees. We're
Yep.
planning to burn our switchgrass. Well, it's getting close to the time. We've got folks burning here already. Of course, Georgia, they burn all the time. We like to set our woods on fire. But we know cover needs to be handled. What can we be doing from a food perspective at this time of year? What are you encouraging your clients to get started on, at this point of the season? Or is it, hey, let's let all of that food stuff wait? We really need to just focus on cover and timber cutting right now.
So it depends on if it's an established plot or one that is going to be new. So if you have a food plot that's going to be cut out of the timber, you can tie that right into your timber work. Especially if
Bingo.
you're having a logger come into the property, you want to have that guy clear out that uh, acre to 2 acre area. Now you're not going to plant 2 acres of food plot, but you got to establish that. You got to clear cut that area. Then you can start putting in the edge feathering, the switchgrass along the outside. You got to fit all that stuff in the middle with enough sunlight to have it grow. So you want to make sure you cut that out now during the winter. You don't want to only cut bedding areas now and leave the food plots for May, because May is when you want to start doing more maybe summer planting. So you want to start
Right.
cutting your trees down now if it's going to be a new plot. Now, if you have an established food plot, right now I would say if you let it go, let the deer use it. Maybe start monitoring it, evaluate how much food you have left over, because then you can figure out, do I need to add more food, or do I have enough food? Like if you have enough, we can kind of keep it where it's at, or they kind of mowed it down. We got to find ways to add more, and then you can start on your established plot frost seeding, late February, early March during the freeze thaw cycle. Or if it's a timber plot, if a lot of times those timber plots, a smaller one, you'll have leaves fall down on them, and then
Hmm.
once the season's over, you get a little warm spell. We'll probably get one of those in January, February. Happens every year. Get out there with the leaf blower, get those leaves off the plot, because nothing's going to kill your food plot faster than having a ton of leaves just sitting on there. Because then who knows? You might get busy and you forget about them, and then those leaves sit on there all summer. You got to start over. So get
Right.
the leaves off the plot
Right.
for the timber plots.
Right, right. So, all right. So we've zoomed out. We've got our access figured out. We know we need to hurry up and get on to some clearing for that. Now's the time of year to do it. We know we're establishing our cover, and we know that especially if we need to carve out new food plots from the timber, now's the time to be getting on that. What would maybe be the next step in planning for your calendar ahead? How are you thinking about that next step? So if we've got our food dialed in, or we got our cover dialed in, or at least we have a plan to accomplish what we want to accomplish this year, what's the next piece of the puzzle here?
So I would say that there's like the chainsaw work, right? You're going in there with a saw, you're cutting everything down. That's like you're taking down the big trees. Hopefully the logger, you can get a logger in there to do that, because then you can get a paycheck, and also he does the work for you. It's faster. And then the next step would be the detail work. So he takes the big trees out, all the trees 8 inches on down, 6 inches on down. Now you can start going in and potentially hinge cutting those. I know you have a lot of conifers where you're at. Probably not the best idea to hinge cut those, but where we're at, we have different species. We got maples, elm, ash, some oaks. Like you can hinge cut those, so that then you can go in there and start doing detail work. But you don't want to necessarily do that when it's super cold outside. So then you
Hmm.
want to wait a little bit. You want to wait. It varies year by year. So right now, it's December. We had a little stretch where it was 45 degrees the other day. So I went out there and did some hinge cutting. But like this weekend, it's going to be 6 degrees. I'm not going to hinge cut. So you want to try to wait until the weather is a few degrees above freezing, so those trees are a little bit more flexible, and they won't just snap off when they're frozen. And so you just kind of wait a little bit. So that would be more like late February, early March into April, kind of before green up. And so that would be the next thing on the calendar. Or with switchgrass, if you want to start putting, like, if you're doing like maybe a switchgrass planting, that or kind of boosting a food plot, then you can start thinking about frost seeding that in that same time frame, because again, it's that freeze thaw cycle. So
Right.
above in the afternoon, it's going to be above freezing. In the evening, it's going to be freezing, and that's like, so I kind of time all that stuff up, like my hinge cutting, my frost seeding, around the same time that we do maple syrup, because that's when the sap is flowing in the maple trees. So that's the best time of year to do that. And every year it's different. Last year that was mid February. We were doing our maple syrup. So
Man, yeah. See, maple syrup flowing, not a thing for us, but I'm thinking about pine sap flowing, right? Like that's what we got going down here. So, and just to keep things in context, where you are, hinge cutting is a very effective bedding tool. When I go north of where I'm at in Georgia, we get a lot of those, red maples and stuff like that they hinge really, really well. The
mm,
deer love to browse on them. They're great for hinging. As I head further south, trees aren't quite as friendly to hinging. And to be honest, for a lot of our areas, because of the way our growing season works, if I get in there and cut early in the season, a lot of times I just want to go more for a clear cut kind of look. I have guys call all the time and they say, I want to go hinge cut this 2 acres. I'm like, no, 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 don't do that. Don't do that. Let's think about a logging project. Let's think about something else where we can go in there. And I want more of a clear cut kind of look. And let's let the seed bank regenerate, because by the time June and July rolls around, it's going to be chest high for us. Right. I mean, yeah, it's going to absolutely explode because we've got a different growing season down here. Things just work a little bit different here in the South.
Mhm.
So, but yeah, hinge cutting. What are some of your favorite species? You mentioned oak, you mentioned maple. Any others that are great? And we know
Elm.
conifers. Conifers across the board just don't do it.
Yep.
But what are some of your others?
I really like elm. That one, it's a really high success rate. In different types of trees, you cut them different. And so, like some trees, you might cut a little bit further. You might go like 70%, but some of them you might go 50%.
Mhm.
There's a willow on my property that I'll cut that one. I can go like 50% through, use the wedge to get it going, and then tip it over with the habitat hook, and that one uh, survives. But if you do like maybe a certain maple, and if you only cut halfway through, you left a lot of that core in there that's really hard, and if you try to tip that over, it's going to barber chair up. It's going to split up the top, it's going to start to tip over it and then kick back, which then is just going to snap off. So on that one, you got to cut almost a little bit more through to just have the outer bark just so it bends and peels away from the tree. So that would be more like a 65%, maybe 70% of the way through. Elm is another one where you can cut less through it. It tends to hinge really well. Basswood tends to hinge pretty well. Oaks, the younger ones, tend to hinge pretty well. Beech hinges really well. So
I
there's
was, I
there's
was going to ask you about beech. We cut down a lot of beech trees, but man, I love finding a big bushy beech tree and hinge cutting that thing,
yeah,
because oh my goodness, the amount of side cover that you just provided from
right.
just one of those laying over.
Yep, and there's different types of like so a beach for us, it's a very low desirable browse. Like
Same.
they barely touch it. But like you said, it's really bushy. If you can find, like a 6-inch beech tree, a young tree, tip that over, that's another one where you can probably only cut 60% of the way through, 55% of the way through, and just bend it over and it'll be fine. And but and they leave their leaves on the whole time.
Right.
So now you put all those leaves that they're still on the trees right now in December. So you can tip that over and it's just going to be just a bush on its side for most of the year. And so yeah, the deer aren't going to eat it. It's not a browse thing, but it's more for cover on the ground. So hinge cutting isn't just for food. It's also for instant cover, and that's why like I use it in tandem with the clear cut method. So I try to go for like 80 to 90% sun in my bedding pockets. Like I might leave like an oak tree in there if it's a really nice oak, so I can get some food in there. Um, but yeah, for the most part, if it's like a tree that's not good for deer, it's coming down. So the
Yeah.
cut the big ones out of there, and I hinge the rest. And so the hinges are the food and the cover while we're waiting for the regrowth.
Right.
And so a lot of that, not a lot, but some of the hinges will die. It's going to happen, but some of them will live. But by the time those hinges die, like let's say they take 2 years to die, once they die, they're going to be replaced by all that new growth, and so then you can just section them up and just put them in a pile. Then you can
Yeah.
just get rid of it. You know,
Yeah. I think we need to do a whole. I got to write this down. I think we need to do a whole episode on hinge cutting trees, and for a couple of reasons. Number one, I get guys that call that think that hinge cutting is like the thing you have to do. Like if you don't hinge cut trees on your property, you're not going to have any deer. I have other guys that say, "Well, I watched so and so on YouTube, and he said that in the South or wherever, you shouldn't hinge cut at all. Hinge cutting is a terrible method to use." And then we've got other guys that are just like, "Man, I don't know what to hinge cut, because different species, like you're saying, are totally different." So I think we should probably do a whole episode just devoted to that as a practice, because it finds any property that I do, it finds its way into it, but it's not. We're not making a solid acre of hinge cut bedding area.
right?
That's a mess. if you
Yep.
if you've ever
Oh
seen
yeah.
something. Yeah, it's an absolute nightmare. So one of the things we haven't talked about yet, as we're planning for our habitat improvements for the year ahead, is tools. Now's a really, really good time, I think, to take a step back, inventory your tools, organize everything. make sure everything's working correctly. What are some of those essential tools that you know you need to have ready to go, for you guys in Michigan when the weather breaks, but for us, when deer season ends, we can be working on habitat literally the next day because we're not going to get ice, we're not going to get snow very often, right? We can get right on habitat work. What are some of those tools that need to be ready to go?
All up. There's a lot of stuff you could get. I'm gonna try to keep it budget friendly. So the most important one would be a chainsaw,
Mm,
and that's for right now. So we're kind of starting in January. Your most important one's a chainsaw. In to work with that, wedges to help knock those trees over. Is that when you're working with whether you're traditionally felling trees or hinge cutting trees, that'll really help you just get that tree a little bit further over so you can get that hook on it and pull it down when you're hinging. Or if you're just trying to fell a tree, that wedge, just start knocking that thing in, you'll see that tree fall over pretty easy. So chainsaw, wedge. If Now this is kind of more a specialty tool. I mentioned the habitat hook. That's another good one for dropping trees. Oh man, I'm gonna get the name of this thing wrong. So there is it's a throw line. I'm sure if you heard of it like this, so it's basically like a weighted sack that you can throw over the top of a tree, and you
mm-hmm.
tie it to the base, and then you pull it down from the top. So
Yep.
it's basically kind of like your habitat hook, except it's a line that you're really far away. So when the tree falls, you're really far away from it, but you pull it down. That way, if you can't quite get it to go, that's another one that I use all the time. If for some reason a tree is kind of leaning the wrong way, I'm by myself, I can't get it down. I use that one a lot. So I don't really see a whole lot of information of guys using that, but that's one that I use a lot to get trees down. So those would be my best ones for cutting trees. Uh, as we start getting closer to food plots, I would say just an over the shoulder spreader. Some guys use the plastic one, some guys use the red bag spreader. I use the red bag spreader. Um, Another one would be a sprayer. So just a
Mm-hmm.
backpack sprayer to either spray your new spot for screening, spray your food plots, spray your deer trails, spray your deer beds if you make those individually. A sprayer, 4 gallon. Uh, Another one would be a handsaw. I would say that I use that just as much as my chainsaw, and that would be either right
Yeah.
now in the winter for hinge cutting small trees. Because one thing you gotta, uh, I do this sometimes. I've been doing it for a long time. I still do it. Is when I put like a new chain on my chainsaw or sharpen one, man, I cut too
Oh,
far through. you
zip
know,
right,
I zip
right
through it.
through them. Yeah.
So like I'm used to like my dull blade. Sometimes I like the dull blade a little bit because I can go a little slower. But as
Right.
soon as I get the new one on, whoop! Well, oh man, like I just killed that tree because like I had
Yep.
cut too far through it. And so sometimes that handsaw is a little nicer for those smaller trees because you can just go slow and just pull it over with your hand. So that's another one. That's a pretty easy one. That's a good stocking stuffer. I don't know when this is
Mm-hmm.
going to air, but that'd be a good one for Christmas. Um, so yeah, we got chainsaw, cutting trees, sprayer, handsaw, uh, bag spreader, habitat hook. Man, what else do I use all the time? I think those are my big ones. Now, those are like the budget friendly ones. Now,
Right.
if you want to
Right.
get into like middle income stuff, an ATV,
Yeah.
because then you can start getting into like, okay, now I've got a 25-gallon sprayer. Now
Right.
I've got a disc. Now I've got a drag. Now I've got a trailer that I can haul everything around on. So if you're doing the poor man stuff, all that stuff that I mentioned first, if you want to get into like middle income uh, improvement stuff, I would say ATV is. I don't know what they're running at right now, but that would be, I would say, a go to. I have no regrets on ever spending money on an ATV and the implements. And like
Right.
the implements are like a little over $100. Like if you want to get like a sprayer or maybe around $200, like a sprayer, a drag, uh, a disc. And I'm for food plots now. I just use a sprayer and a drag. I rarely use my disc because
Right.
I'm all sand here now. I
Right.
can't go down into the dirt. I have to
Right.
just lightly touch the top. So
Yep. And that's a critique of a lot of those discs that you pull behind. So I've got a Polaris side by side, right? And I'm looking at different disc options. I don't have a disc for that yet because we've got a tractor that we disc with. But like I've been looking at some of the discs for the Polaris, and a lot of the critiques of those is, well, they don't dig in deep enough. And I'm like, dude, I'm not a row crop farmer. Like
Right.
I'm not turning, if I'm turning soil like that, I'm, I'm, I'm probably doing something wrong. Like I don't want to disturb my soil that much. I want to turn it up on the top just a little bit, maybe, or maybe take my drag, a chain harrow with the teeth, put the teeth down and pull it behind. Like that's
Yep.
going to get a lot of ground disturbance that I'm really looking for. Now, there are spots with clay that's going to turn hard and that kind of thing that are a little bit different. But yeah, I love all these tools that you mentioned. One tool that I added, I guess it was last year, was a backpack sprayer, but it's electric, an
Oh,
electric.
okay. Yeah.
Oh, well, it's not budget friendly necessarily. It's probably, I think it was 200 bucks, 180 bucks, something like that. But it's a 4-gallon sprayer, backpack sprayer with the pump. And man, that thing is an absolute game changer. Not having to walk around doing
Yeah.
this all day. It was it's super nice. It's on that borderline though of like, you could have bought one for 35 bucks or 40 bucks or whatever, but it is what it is. So
Worth
all
it.
right, so yeah, worth it, I think, in my opinion. So we've got our tools figured out. We're kind of getting ready. If you had to say like what's the most important thing, and I know it's going to be very um, property specific, right? But we are right here in the winter time. Let's say January, February. What's the most important thing that most people should be working on? Um, at this time of year, what's the thing that hey, you really need to do it now because you're not going to have as good a result later?
I would say timber work. So
Mm,
that would be taking your trees down. And this is the dormant season, like we talked about earlier. And so a lot of your trees, like one, it's easier to go out there and do it now. It's not very warm. It's no bugs out there. There's if you try to do this stuff in July, you're not going to be able to do as much because it's hot. You're going to tire easier, and there's gonna be mosquitoes all over the place. It's easier to get back there and cut now. It's like you'll be working up a sweat back there. It'll be 20 degrees and you'll be sweating. So even if it is cold, like let's say it's 25 degrees, you don't really want to be hinge cutting trees if it's that cold. If you have opportunities to do it later, but you still can drop the big ones. If there's a tree that's over 8 inches, just drop it. Like just to put it on the ground, flush cut the stump around knee height. That way you can get some stump sprouts. That'll last forever. Like if you're, let's say you poorly hinge cut it, it might last you 2 years and then the whole thing dies. But if you just drop it and cut it at the stump, that could last you forever. It's just going to be a big bush on the ground, and that's like a you've heard. I'm sure you've heard this, like a mineral stump. That's great for the deer, and you could do that right now. And all the tops that you're dropping on the ground right now, that's winter food for these deer. I know maybe not where you're at, but up here they're not going to starve. But that's going to really help those deer get through. And instead of coming into the spring, trying to replenish all their energy that they lost over the winter, they're going to come in, you know, running. They're going to hit the ground running, and they're going to be able to, if for guys that want to shoot big bucks, they're going to be able to just really start putting on the antler growth right away instead of trying to recover from last winter. So if you can
yeah,
start putting more food on the ground, so that's another
yeah,
thing too. That's a benefit from cutting right now.
absolutely. And I think one last thing that I'll add to it, and this is especially true for us, the earlier we can cut, the more of that growing season you get to take advantage of. Specifically, when we're thinking about creating cover, I want every bit of that growing season in my areas that I've opened up. Let's in far south, like so where our property is. At the end of February, you start to see trees budding out with green. At the end of February, first week or so of March. So it's already greening up. So we've got to get on that work really, really, really early if we want to get it done because I want to take full advantage of as much of that growing season as I possibly can so that cover can be as good as it can by the time fall rolls around next year. So, Jake, man, thanks for joining me this evening. Thanks for the run through, I guess you could say. I'm looking forward to hearing some more specifics. I've been sitting here feverishly taking notes, and that's just all the topics that I'm gaining ideas for this upcoming season. So, folks, if you've got specific habitat improvements you'd like for us to talk about, you can email us through our website. You can find us on social media. You can drop comments in the YouTube channel. Although I don't know, we may see it, we may not see it. I don't know. We were just joking earlier about whether we read all the comments or not, or whether we have time to. Um, although I've got to give a quick shout out to the guy who called you out on your cameras. Uh,
Yeah,
I don't always read the comments, but when I do, I found one that was that was getting after Jake a little bit because for so long you had all those cameras, like all your cell cams back behind you, just lined up. And
Yeah,
somebody was like, "Why are they all back behind you? They need to be in the woods." I was like, "Yeah, get him,
yeah,
get him." They're
yeah.
out now, but you run a ton. So, are you doing much of that this time of year too? Are you concerned with gathering intel into January, February timeframe, or are you just kind of focused on the habitat?
So I'm still gathering intel. All my cameras are still out. I run Tacticams, and I subscribe to their service for 4 months. So
Okay,
I'll do it for the entire hunting season, the month prior. But then as soon as December 31st hits, I cancel all my cameras, and but then they just turn into regular trail cameras. Like they're still running. They're just not
right,
sending it to my app. So I let those sit out there for all of January, and then I just find time when I can to go out there and get them. A lot of them are dead by then. Like they die somewhere in the middle of January. But at least then I can kind of go after the season a little bit to get somewhat of an idea as to what bucks survive. And that's really the only thing that I'm doing at that point is I'm just trying to get somewhat of an idea as the inventory for next year.
right, right. All right. Well, I've got to stop it there because if I don't, I'm going to ask you another question. We're going to go all night. So, Jake, thanks for joining me, folks. Thank you so much for listening. Go check out our YouTube channel. And like I said, if you have any questions for us, you can find us on our website and contact us there. Thanks again, Jake.